So I'm thinking about hands in design history in part of a larger project. And this is just a very small segment of it that is highly Hagley related, because I'm reporting on some research I did there. I'm setting my work within the context of the hand-machine debate, which I'm not going to rehearse here. We know, don't we, that mass production is best viewed as a melange of hand and machine technique rather than existing in separate categories. This relationship has been negotiated through the period of industrialization. And I'm showing you here the 1899 report, Hand and Machine Labour, from the US government, trying to provide people with the information that they needed to make informed decisions about whether or not to invest in machinery that could perhaps perform jobs more quickly than skilled hand labour could. But in fact, what the data show is that that's not always the case. And when, as you see here, each individual action is considered, it's often the case that whether or not mechanisation will save money is a complicated prospect to decide upon. And this report looks at cost savings rather than other attributes of added value. So hands and machines work together. And today we have some instances in which the machine has made no entry into various activities. I'm thinking about aspects of bespoke tailoring, for instance, but not haute couture, which has embraced the machine in part, as we know. So I'm following Geoffrey Meikle's call for design historians and others to secure first-hand experience of the objects that we study. And in my handbook project, as I'm calling it, I've made it my business to handle each of the focal objects that I'm researching. And so here you see on the left me handling a Gimel ring in the Victoria and Albert Museum. And here you see handling of a 3D printed gun by Defence Distributed, which is also in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. And I'm showing you these images to make clear that I can get close, but not as close as I want to these objects. So at the Design History Society conference last year, I talked about the 3D printed gun, and I also talked about gloves. I was slightly ahead of the COVID curve in speaking about hands as potentially dangerous, not as dangerous as the gun, but potentially dangerous, and the use of sterile gloves in researching archival objects. But I'm not able to wear the ring, and I'm not able to point the gun. I was specifically told that I wasn't allowed to do that. They anticipated my desire to do so in the museum. So it's quite difficult for design historians and others to get access to the objects that they want to research in the ways that they might like to. But it's not difficult at the Hagley Museum and Library, which has gone against the trend that I've found in the archives I've been working at, in bringing delightful boxes of handles to researchers. So you may know that Thomas Lamb, the handle man, focused the majority of his working life on designing handles alone, so a specialist in quite an unusual way. And he drew on his training in drawing, painting and anatomy to do so. His initial interest in handles was to help war veterans by better designing a crutch. But the Limrest crutch wasn't mass produced, although it formed the basis for his wedge lock handles. So Lamb's experience of touch strongly informed his design processes, and that's clear from the archive. And I found when I was looking through these boxes that I was relying very heavily on touch as a research method. But I also had planned to do that, whereas I think that any researcher, whether or not they've decided to prioritize embodied research in their methodological toolkit, will also need to rely on touch for this archive to make sense. I'm thinking about Deborah Allen's experience of going to Thomas Lamb's workshop and how that might compare to the experience of looking at the archive. Deborah Allen, in the first number of Industrial Design, referred to volumes of notes and meticulous sketches and many potential applications for the wedge lock handle, tray upon tray of oddly curved and twisted sculptures in glass, plastic and aluminium, steel, clay, wood and plastic wood, which look like the bones and shards of a civilization. But what Allen was able to witness that I couldn't was Lamb's working process. She described him pink-cheeked and besmocked, filing away at his latest handle. And she attributed his practical concern for tactile experience to his mother's New England roots. He quotes in conversation with Allen, an imaginary New Englander, commenting on his work, "That's nice, Mr. Lamb. How does she feel in the hand?" And so feeling being a justifiable primary focus in researching Lamb made me think about how I could recreate his working processes in my research as a design historian. I'm conscious that he wasn't simply using his own hands to make things. He wasn't simply a besmocked, rosy-cheeked whittler. He was using what he knew about anatomy. He was using measurements. He was creating and recreating handles, molding them. But then when his products were licensed, they were used without further modification. So there's a close relationship between Lamb's hand sculptured models and the absence of engineering drawings and going straight into production from those models. Now, thinking about the way these handles look, I can't share the view of another writer writing in 1954 at the same time as Allen wrote in Industrial Design magazine, John Christopher Jones, writing in the UK's Design magazine, about how he couldn't do what Allen did and visit the workshop. He couldn't touch Lamb's handles, but his view was that it didn't matter, because it can be seen that the curved shapes have the visual purpose of indicating the manner of gripping and the direction of movement, and this is truly ergonomic virtue. So for Jones, you could see how the handle would feel to users. And a researcher, Delphia, has commented that this made the invisible apparent. We can both see and feel the ergonomic impulse at work in his handles. The wedge lock exposes what more nuanced designers integrated seamlessly into their designs. Now, I question the fact that the argument that the wedge lock handle communicates the experience of being felt and used. If that were the case, then direct object handling would have less value. What I'm arguing is that direct object handling can lead the researcher into speculation and then findings that are not available through other routes. And I'm thinking here about the way in which Lamb described the wedge lock as fitting the average hand. Yes, he used measurements and wider data, but what he's talking about, I suggest, is his own hand and not my hand. As I was handling these handles, I was thinking about whether the ridges that they contain would be irritants if I was holding a heavy bag, for example. And Delphia has said, a wedge lock handle that fits the hand feels amazing, but if the scale is too large or small, or the angle of a groove doesn't quite match the hand, it feels incredibly awkward. So I suggest that embodied research requires a first-hand register in writing, because the way that you express what you discover needs to be obviously owned by you as part of your experience of research.
Grace, 2 minutes left.
Thank you. So when we do embodied research, we need to change the way we write about what we're doing and how we're doing it. And I'm moving my analysis from embodied research into a more theoretical position, and think about this average user, and whether that's Lam or me or somebody else. And think too about George Simmel's work on handles. For Simmel, the relationship between a handle and a vessel was nothing less than indicative of the relationship between an individual and society. So a badly wrought handle was a dystopian vision, and a well-wrought one was likewise helpful in improving society as he saw it. So
1 minute, please.
Pardon?
You have 1 minute.
Yeah, thank you. Bess Williamson and Amy Hanray have both critiqued universal design for not serving everybody. And Caroline Criado Perez has also critiqued design as a profession for not serving women very well. Smaller hands, weaker grips. What I'm suggesting is that when I used my hands to examine the Lam archive, I was able to understand that that handle didn't serve the average user as well as it might have been claimed to do. But I'm also saying that all design historians and other kinds of historians should use their hands in their research. And the question, what did it feel like, should be a legitimate one in research, including research using archival materials. Because if we all ask that question, then we'll get away from average and universal impressions of design. Thank you.